Before the video starts, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our new content. The movie opens with Robert Oppenheimer, a nuclear physicist, sitting in front of a committee that asks him many questions to decide whether or not to remove his security clearance. The important thing is that Oppenheimer began to tell his whole story, from his childhood to the end, during his conversation with the committee. He said that he studied at Cambridge University before World War II. Still, he needed to learn the specialization he loved in quantum physics, which was unavailable in America then. So he was always sad and dreamed of stars and atoms, among other things that kept him awake all night. There was a doctor at the university who made fun of him a lot, to the point that Oppenheimer once entered the doctor's lab and injected his apple with potassium so he could eat it and be poisoned. But Oppenheimer saw a dream that made him run to the lab the next day to take the apple before the doctor ate it. When he arrived at the lab, he found another scientist named Neef. Neef was very happy to see Oppenheimer and thanked him for attending my lectures so often. Then he advised him to go to Germany to study quantum physics and told him he would be successful there. Oppenheimer went to Germany and became a famous scientist in the field of quantum physics in a very short time. He also learned German very quickly, which impressed one of the attendees at his lectures, Dr. Robin. Robin sat down with Oppenheimer at night and praised his effort in learning German so quickly. They became close friends. After a short time, Oppenheimer returned to America and became a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. There he met another professor named Lawrence. Lawrence was happy to see Oppenheimer, but he told him that the subject he was teaching was unpopular and that he only had one student. But Oppenheimer believed in everything he did and started studying quantum physics with this student. He soon had more students, and Oppenheimer's subject became very popular at the university. And everyone wanted to learn it because of his excellent methods and great and superficial knowledge, and everything was fine. Until Oppenheimer started interacting with people more and more. At one party, his brother was present, who was very communist, and they sat together for a while. Then Oppenheimer met several communists, including a young communist girl named Jim. And from here, the problem started because Oppenheimer was very impressed with Jim, and she loved him too. Therefore, a large number of communists entered Oppenheimer's life. This affected him and helped them directly or indirectly, so he would bring students from parties to the university and teach them lectures. Then Lawrence came and warned him and said that what you are doing is not good. You may not be thinking about the consequences, but it will destroy you. Then Oppenheimer realized that Lawrence's words were valid, so he decided to cut ties with all these people, but he went to another party with a group of communists, and this was the last party he attended. There he met Kitty, who, by the way, was also cutting ties with communism, so they took the road together and fell in love and got married too. And after a short time, they had 2 children. Then one day, he went to the university and found Lawrence shocked by what he had read in the newspaper. The newspaper told him about nuclear fission and the incredible energy it could produce. Oppenheimer and Kitty tried calculating the division, but they thought something like that couldn't happen. But Oppenheimer was surprised to learn that one of his students had done it. Finally, the theory was proven. The idea, in short, is that if you bombard a uranium nucleus with neutrons, the heart can split and release a large amount of energy. This led Oppenheimer to understand that a series of reactions could occur this way, causing nuclear fission to create a bomb that had never been seen before. After he understood this, Oppenheimer realized that as long as he had access to this information, Hitler and his army could also reach the same conclusion and create a nuclear bomb before them. He was even more afraid when he read in the newspaper the next day that Hitler had invaded Poland and bombed many cities there. The war was still raging, so Oppenheimer had to act and start working to end it. Fortunately, a short time after this, Leslie Groves appeared. He was the head of the United States Nuclear Weapons Development Project, and he was there to ask Oppenheimer to lead the project to create a nuclear bomb and try to finish it before Hitler and the Nazis could. Oppenheimer agreed. Without much ado, they began to work on the project. They looked for a suitable location to work on the project until they settled on a place in New Mexico. They built a small town there to house the project and named it Los Alamos. Oppenheimer then gathered doctors, scientists, and university professors worldwide to help him with the enormous project. Among the people who worked for Oppenheimer were Lawrence and Robbie, and finally, a scientist named Edward Teller. Finally, everything was ready, and the people were there. They started working, but Robbie was very afraid of working on such a dangerous project and was scared of the consequences. Oppenheimer told him that they were trying to solve a global problem and that with this bomb, they could make Hitler stop the war. Robbie agreed to continue with Oppenheimer. The next day, Oppenheimer met with his scientists, and they started to think about all the possible ways to make a nuclear bomb. Before anyone could say anything, Teller took out a research paper he had written himself. When Oppenheimer saw the paper, he was shocked. He immediately took it and went to see Teller. Teller told him that the report proved that the nuclear bomb that he was trying to make, if it was made, could affect the atmosphere and cause a large number of reactions that would burn the Earth altogether. Oppenheimer was distraught, so he asked Einstein for help. Einstein said he did not know how to help him, so he left. Oppenheimer was very disappointed but decided to continue working on the project. The next day, Oppenheimer brought his family to the new house in Los Alamos so that he could be close to work. In general, Oppenheimer started to explain to the scientists the types of nuclear bombs that he would be working on, which were a bomb called Fat Man, and another called Little Boy. They were both different sizes, but they had the same purpose with other damages, and they would both work on the same theory, nuclear fission. Teller suggested to Oppenheimer that they work on making a hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer was unhappy with this idea because he did not want the project to become too big for a destructive bomb of this type. Teller thought that he was not interested in anything other than his idea, which was the only thing that he wanted to be implemented. Therefore, the topic passed, but the idea of the hydrogen bomb was not forgotten. The work continued, and the project progressed more and more every day. After a while, the scientist Niels Bohr came to see what Oppenheimer had achieved. He also congratulated him on his great work and scientific progress. Oppenheimer thought that Bohr was coming to join them. However, Bohr came to warn him about the project. He said that Oppenheimer was giving the government a weapon of mass destruction and that they were expected to use it. Oppenheimer was very disappointed but decided to continue working on the project. While concentrating on Bohr's speech, he was interrupted by sad news. His girlfriend, Jim, had died. Jim died a while ago. Kitty found out and went looking for Oppenheimer until she found him sitting alone in the forest, crying. She knew that he loved her, and she wanted to comfort him. And the subject was dropped. A few days later, Oppenheimer discovered that Hitler was dead and Germany had surrendered. People were protesting and demanding he stop the project now that Germany had been defeated. Oppenheimer knew that Germany was defeated, but the war was still going on because Japan was still fighting fiercely and would not stop until they knew that there was a powerful force that could hurt them. After a while, the project was almost complete, and Oppenheimer went with Groves to the Minister of Defense to talk to him. There, Oppenheimer told the minister that the bomb did not have to be dropped on Japan. They could just warn them and be done with it, but if they dropped it, it would kill thousands or even millions of people. Everyone disagreed with Oppenheimer and explained that Japan would not surrender until they were hit and knew that an impossible force was standing in their way. Oppenheimer was very sad about this, but he agreed and went back to work. Finally, the nuclear bomb was finished, and it was time to test it. The test was conducted near the city where the project was being carried out, but a little bit away in the desert. Unfortunately, it was a stormy day with rain, and everything was terrible, so everyone was afraid because they had not planned for it. Despite this, they continued and set up the bomb and waited for the right moment to detonate it. And then, it exploded, and for the first time in history, people saw an explosion of enormous size. At that moment, Oppenheimer realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He would have the blood of many innocent people on his hands. The explosion was over, and everyone was happy. Oppenheimer and some of the scientists, however, realized their terrible mistake. The bombs had killed thousands of people and caused widespread destruction. Oppenheimer was distraught. He couldn't sleep that night and was terrified of what had happened. The next day, he heard on the radio that the United States had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 2 cities in Japan. Thousands of people were killed in the bombings. Oppenheimer was relieved that Japan had surrendered but was also unfortunate. He knew that he had played a role in the deaths of thousands of people, and he was haunted by the images of the destruction he had caused. Oppenheimer went to see President Truman and asked him not to use the bomb again. He also asked him to share the bomb with the Soviet Union and to close the Los Alamos laboratory. Truman was not interested in Oppenheimer's requests. He told Oppenheimer that the United States would continue to develop the bomb and that they would not share it with the Soviet Union. Oppenheimer was disappointed but knew he could not change Truman's mind. He returned to Los Alamos, but he was never the same again. He was haunted by the images of the destruction he had caused, and he knew that he would never be able to forget what had happened. The president was not interested in what Oppenheimer was saying. He knew they would not do anything Oppenheimer was asking them to do. He also told Oppenheimer that Teller would be allowed to build the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer knew that the Soviets would eventually develop the hydrogen bomb and wanted the United States to be ahead of them. He was also upset that the government was not interested in his concerns about using nuclear weapons. The government was concerned that Oppenheimer was a communist sympathizer, and they began to investigate him. They found that he had friends who were communists, and they also found that he had been in contact with Soviet scientists. However, the government perceived that since he knew all of these people, he was a traitor, thus issuing an order to remove all of Oppenheimer's security powers and others. Currently, he sits in the jury assembly room, endeavoring to persuade them that he had disclosed nothing. Alas, my friend, before continuing this trial, we must urgently relocate to another locale. Simultaneously, on the other side, we have an individual named Lou Strauss residing in a place you might as well call a courtroom. He's here today. Them as they conversed, Einstein walked away upset and left Strauss with a rather unpleasant mien. At that moment, Strauss felt that Oppenheimer had spoken ill about him in front of Einstein, and this gave rise to a resentment in Strauss that only grew stronger. Later, he presented a document in court claiming his inventions could harm the environment because of their radiation. Supposedly, at that time, Oppenheimer made a mockery of Strauss in court and made light of the situation. This further incited Strauss's anger, and in one instance, Strauss attended a meeting involving Oppenheimer and many other significant figures from scientists and others. The gathering was convened to discuss a catastrophe after they had received a signal from Russia indicating their development of the nuclear bomb. At that moment, Strauss began implying in front of everyone, "It's Oppenheimer. He may be the one who told the Russians about the bomb design," which is understandable because he was suspicious of Oppenheimer, especially since he was familiar with many communists. However, these are all the memories we saw in the film with Oppenheimer. Let's go back to the trial. Strauss, the court, were taking everything from Strauss's words, that he was innocent of anything Oppenheimer did, and that he's a pass, and he's generally fine. The court decided to take a break to think about what he said, and Strauss went to a break session with his lawyer. And he spoke to them during the break. And here, we understood everything from their words. Strauss is the one who had Oppenheimer tried. Do you remember how William sent a letter to the court accusing Oppenheimer of being a spy and a traitor, and he sent a document with the letter? This document includes all of Oppenheimer's past with his friends in the fascist party. The lesson is that Strauss told Oppenheimer then that he should not keep quiet about these accusations and must appeal the verdict and try to convince them that he was okay. Oppenheimer agreed, and this is why he is currently in court. Strauss wanted to do this to put Oppenheimer in a difficult position. After all, the appeal is not in a regular court but in a small room without formal procedures so that any evidence can be used, even if it is not legal. But this is the whole story. Of course, the people with Strauss at the time were upset with what he did, but he continued to justify them between him and his wife. The break ended. The trial began again, and here the problem occurred. Oppenheimer's old friend David appeared and testified in court against Strauss and proved to the court that Strauss was the one who did everything to Oppenheimer and that he was the one who gave him this reputation. But, sir, everything is over for Strauss and his position as minister, and honestly, I am not well aware, but we saw afterward that all the people in the court, from journalists and others, were pleased with what Strauss did, so I think they stood with the truth, not with Strauss. Therefore, Oppenheimer retained all of his powers and finally became safe. After a long time, the United States awarded him the highest honorary award in the United States in recognition of all his services. This is the story of Oppenheimer. And before I finish the video with you, I want to tell you, my friend. What did Oppenheimer say to Einstein? Oppenheimer made Einstein walk away sad when they were standing in the garden. It also caused the beginning of the feud between Oppenheimer and Strauss. Oppenheimer was talking to Einstein usually because they were friends. But Einstein told Oppenheimer that the bomb had been made and that the idea that it would burn the atmosphere may not happen, but one day all countries will arm themselves with hundreds of bombs, and in the end, there will be a massive war with all these bombs, and everyone will die. And this is all that Einstein said to Oppenheimer, and this is what made him sad, and therefore Strauss thought, when he saw Oppenheimer sad, that he was talking about him behind his back, but the truth was different, and the film ended. And that's it. Peace.